Whales are the largest and arguably the most majestic animals on our planet. But like many animals, they are threatened due to climate change. Researchers at the New England Aquarium have a particular interest in right whales, as sadly, there are now less than 400 North Atlantic right whales left in the world.
Climate change is something that's easy for people to kind of think is out there, it's numbers, it's coming in the future. And I've studied this species for 35 years, and I've watched as a very quickly climate change has impacted them.
Drastic changes have been measured in the Gulf of Maine since 2010, making this historically rich feeding ground zero for right whales.
The Gulf of Maine, which is sort of the center of their traditional feeding habitat, has been warming faster than almost any other body of water in the world. About a half a degree every single year. So it's not because it's too warm for the right whales, but it's impacting the food and the ocean currents that bring the food into specific areas.
You have the Gulf Stream, which brings warm tropical water up toward the Gulf of Maine. You also have the Labrador Current, which brings colder Arctic water down. And where that warm and cold water mix, it really affects the oceanography in the Gulf of Maine.
Right whale migration is also caused by rapid warming occurring a great distance away in the Arctic.
The Arctic warming changes ocean currents. Those ocean currents change where the plankton is going to be. And because the plankton is moving, the right whales are moving.
Right whales are on the move looking for food sources, and believe it or not, despite their size, their food is as small as a grain of rice.
If you've ever been swimming in the ocean, you've probably swallowed thousands of them, just like right whales.
They look like they're mowing a lawn, these huge mouths just going across the surface back and forth, trying to keep the widest part of their mouth at where the densest plankton patch is.
Right whales rely on copious amounts of plankton, a fatty species of copepod, for energy. However, it also takes a great deal of energy just to feed.
Right whales, they have huge mouths. And so for a right whale to swim with its mouth open is like us carrying two large umbrellas underwater and trying to drag them through the water. So they have to really make a smart decision. Is there enough food here for me to open my mouth? I might get some food, but I'm going to expend more energy just trying to push my mouth through the... So it's not that there's not necessarily enough plankton out there. It has to be very concentrated. And that's what's driving their changes in movements and where they feed.
While there are protective measures in place in their traditional feeding areas like the Gulf of Maine, changing ocean currents and rapidly warming Gulf waters continue to shift their food sources and thus right whales into unexpected and hazardous areas.
The right whale population is critically endangered, and in part thanks to climate change, we are seeing more deaths. If something isn't done to combat that, we can end up seeing more right whale skeletons like this.
While we have stopped hunting them, we have not stopped killing them. So they're getting killed unintentionally by entanglements in fishing gear and ship strikes.
When they're searching high and low for this food, they have a higher chance of encountering some kind of human activity, like gear they can be tangled in, or ship strikes is the other major problem.
Some headway has been made regarding shipping lanes, slowing ships in areas where right whales are known to be present. However, entanglements continue to peril these dignified creatures.
The lines that right whales get entangled in have gotten stronger and stronger over the years. So a whale that would get entangled before would be only mildly injured. Now they're being severely injured by those entanglements or killed.
Right whales are now in uncharted waters like the Gulf of St. Lawrence. There are some protective measures in place there, but as a human population, we need to come together to do even more.
There are solutions. They're really challenging to implement. There's technology that can allow fishermen to fish without ropes, still be able to collect their traps, do what they're doing. It's going to be an expensive transition, and the fishermen will need a lot of both financial and management support to make that transition.
The public can help too, and all it takes is submitting a simple photograph or video captured or seen on social media to the New England Aquarium. Since transmitters can wound the whales and get damaged easily, since 1980, NEAQ has relied on their catalog of North Atlantic right whales for tracking. If researchers can identify individual whales, they have a better idea of an individual's health and how migration patterns may be changing.
We had a whale that was seen up off of Iceland that people on a whale watch boat took a photograph of. He had just been seen in Cape Cod Bay a few months earlier. And then that whale was seen off the coast of France. Luckily, someone took a video and they sent the video to us and we're like, oh, that's Mogul. That's Mogul who's doing these interesting movement patterns. We actually don't know where they are a larger chunk of the time. So we rely on our ability to find them, take photographs, observe what their weight looks like, what their skin condition looks like, whether or not they have a calve, whether or not they have new entanglements. And so by not being able to find them as frequently, it really impacts our ability to know how the population is doing.
Based on these photographs, researchers have noted a change in right whale anatomy due to injuries from entanglements and other factors.
All of those human impacts and these cumulative stressors, as they call them, mount over years and years. And in fact, a study was just done that showed that right whales are getting shorter.
A right whale in 2019 will be about 3 feet shorter than a right whale in 1981.
Not only has there been a change in their growth, but also a change in their reproductive rates due to less available plankton in their typical feeding areas in the Gulf of Maine.
They used to give birth every 4 years, 4 to 5 years. Now they're giving birth, some of them is every 10 years.
Why is that?
Well, a right whale will lose about 1/3 of its body weight nursing a calf. So a female has to be in really good body condition in order to carry a pregnancy to term and then nurse the calf. So a female will choose to forego getting pregnant in that if she isn't in a good enough body condition. So if we don't have the reproductive females, which are the ones who are getting injured and killed at a higher rate than the males, then we don't have the species.
Because right whales generally stay so close to the eastern seaboard, they're at risk from human activities 12 months of the year. This keeps their population from growing, and climate change is only adding salt to the wound. Due to the changing climate, predicting exactly where right whales will be next year remains a challenge.
We can be using forecasting as a climate adaptation tool. We can, just like we forecast the weather, we can forecast things like whales. And that's something that we're working on in our lab. So hopefully, as we see each year looking different, we can get a little bit of a head start for how to plan ahead.
You think of other creatures that are also being impacted. Fish, for example, they're just not as visible to us. The ocean itself it's a very, it's like outer space. It's such a different environment. It's really hard for us to wrap our minds around what's happening under the surface.
You know, I have tremendous heartache about this situation and this species. It's not even just a species that's going extinct. It's individuals. It's individuals that I've seen, from when they were calves grow up and then give birth to their own calves. It's personal, and I think if people can feel that the way I feel that, then I would hope that they would care.
Caring is step one. Taking action is step two.
Call their congressman or write letters or change their behavior. Ask where their seafood's coming from to see whether or not it's whale safe. There are lots of things that people who really feel that it's personal can do. So I hope people can find that in themselves.
Right whales are not the only whales to be impacted by the effects of climate change. In part 2 of this series, we travel up the coast to Bar Harbor, Maine to talk with researchers at the College of the Atlantic to learn how fin and humpback whales are faring. Whales. These magnificent creatures have captivated humans for centuries.
People are universally astounded. Look, there's a whale. You hear that all the time.
And let's see if we can get that tail up out of the water and get it up over the other side of it.
It's one of those things, it's like art. You know, why do we have to protect it like music?
In part 1 of this series, we discussed how right whales are critically endangered due to the impacts from climate change. But right whales are not the only whales who feed in the Gulf of Maine. In part 2, we learn how fin and humpback whales are faring.
With fin whales, they're actually still listed as an endangered species, and a lot of that is because we really don't have good data on them. We don't have good population sizes, we don't know where they breed, and so reproduction is really hard to actually measure when you don't even know what that baseline is.
To complicate matters, fin whales typically swim in deeper waters, which makes them more difficult to locate and track. However, trouble tracking these gentle giants wasn't always the case.
I mean, I started working here in '92, and we used to see groups of 20, 15 fin whales all surging through the water feeding. It was like a given that you would go out and you would see groups of fin whales. You'd see 5 here and 10 there and 4 here and 20 there, and you never see that anymore, ever. You see maybe 3, maybe 2, maybe 1.
While fin whales are tough to find, humpback whales are stealing the spotlight, for now.
With the humpback, it was actually recently delisted from the Endangered Species Act, so the humpback whale, we think that the population is quite healthy right now. That's right now. We don't know what things are going to be changing. We see distributions changing, but when they run out of areas to be able to be shifting, we might start seeing some more scary things happening with some of their numbers.
We definitely have noticed a decline in the number of whales locally, and that they come later every year. They used to be reliably here in June. I mean, I'm going back 10 years or so, then July. Now it's like mid-August, if that.
Not only are the whales arriving later, but they are also showing up in unexpected places.
So since we're not finding anything in those typical areas of where we have spent for decades now, is that we got to push on. We have to go farther.
Well, thanks to climate change, we have to travel a little bit farther out to look for the whales now. In fact, Bar Harbor Whale Watch Company took us 50 miles offshore of Bar Harbor, and we are now in Canadian waters, and this is where we saw humpback whales.
Humpback whales are one of the most common whales that we will see out here. And one of the things that really help us to identify them is not only a pattern of black and white on the underside of their tail, but they also have scars on them. And much of those scars that they have is coming from entanglements or ship strikes.
Allied whale researchers curated a catalog of whales that has contributors from all over the North Atlantic. Identifying every individual whale spotted helps researchers have a better understanding of each whale's story, including Bayou, who we saw on this cruise.
It's important because we can follow them over the years. We know Bayou, we can follow her since she was a calf in 2006. We can follow her from when she was born to now, so we can see that she's now a 15-year-old whale with a calf.
So the calf is still just behind mom?
We also have when she was a calf and have her original identification pictures, she had a full tail. So what we're finding now, and we discovered in 2008, we don't know exactly what happened and what the incident was, but she's lost part of her tail. And there is a good possibility, although we are not sure, that it could have been a propeller. It could have been an interaction with a boat. Maybe it was even an entanglement. From that entanglement and ship strikes, they're finding that it's about 60% of the humpback whale population has been entangled at some point in its life and has those scars.
Whales, when they get entangled, just instinctively they roll as a way of trying to get it off, and that makes it worse. So then they get it caught in their mouth, they get it caught around their flippers, so then they get bound, and then they can't eat. They do suffer. You know, they can't eat. One time I saw a whale that, it was trying to spy up, which is when they come up with their head and the line was dragging down its mouth and there was blood. It was just horrible.
One of the reasons entanglements are happening more often is because both whales and humans are now visiting uncharted colder waters in search of food.
I do believe that what I have experienced is that the entanglements are becoming more prominent because lobster and other fishing is getting into deeper waters and colder waters because they're trying to find the cold waters in a warming Gulf of Maine.
And the hard part with humpbacks and fin whales is the things that they eat, the fish that they eat, are the same thing that fishermen want to fish.
These whales prefer fish like herring and an even smaller type of fish, which is high in calories.
The humpbacks and fins are really more targeting small schooling fish and things like krill. We have this little jar of krill right here, which is basically a bigger crustacean than copepod, still considered plankton like that, but it's going to be a little bit of a bigger target.
While humans rely on our teeth to chew our food, fin and humpback whales rely on what's called baleen in their mouths to filter what they eat.
Them opening their mouths really big, this facing the outside, and then when they close their mouth and take in that big water, the fish can't actually make it through and they get stuck in these little hairy fringes, and they can lick it with their tongue and swallow all of their prey and all the fish whole.
However, due to the rising temperatures in the Gulf of Maine, schools of these fish are also shifting. To learn exactly what the whales are eating now, Allied Whale, under a federal research permit, collects blubber samples using a crossbow with specialized arrow tips.
That barb is specialized so that it won't go into the whale, but it stops and just takes a tiny bit of skin and blubber. Because there's a float on the arrow, it'll then float on the water, and once the whale is dove, we can safely come up and collect that arrow, unscrew the tip, take the sample, and then send it off for chemical analysis.
Some of the findings are concerning, and humans are to blame.
The little phytoplankton and zooplankton, they actually eat microscopic particles of plastic, and then the fish eat them, and the whales eat that. And then we eat the fish. So we have plastic inside of us, the whales have plastic inside of them.
If humans continue to pollute our oceans, whales and the entire marine habitat will suffer. Although whales are at the top of the food chain, they drive ocean productivity.
The food they eat is then works through the system and then goes back into the water and fertilizes.
Nutrients in their waste, combined with light at the surface, leads to photosynthesis that occurs in the first 100 feet of the ocean, which feeds the bottom of the food chain. So even when whales pass on, they still provide nourishment.
Whale falls, when they unfortunately die, they'll fall down to the bottom of the ocean, and then they feed the entire bottom of the ocean in that sector. All sorts of animals will come and feed on that whale, and they rely on their bodies to sustain them. And so they're feeding the base of the food chain, which then feeds its way back up.
The circle of life represents the infinite nature of energy. What will happen to our marine ecosystem if humans do not alter our behavior? What would an ocean look like without whales? There are actions we can take now to help protect these magnificent creatures.
Use less plastic, less single source packaging, and reusable straws. Any of these things, while they seem small and inconsequential, they're much more important to changing culture.
What we can do to help them is try and clean up the ocean, try and get rid of the fishing gear, and try and tag people's lines so that if a whale's caught, you can say, this is your line and you weren't careful and here's your fine. The most important things we can do is reduce speed of vessels. There are studies that show if you're traveling at 10 knots as opposed to 15, as opposed to 20, mortality goes down significantly.
Having knowledge about whales and about their habitat and about what they're doing, going out on a whale watch and feeling connected, that's a huge first step, I think, to becoming passionate and caring about something.